there, friends. Welcome to Whiskey Lord, Drew Hanisch. And it's been a while. I am back, though, and doing something special today. Last year, throughout the year, we were doing a bunch of voting on Instagram and Patreon for Whiskey Lord's fan favorite independent craft distillery of the year. Now, this was something that started out with over 320 distilleries that were all nominated. And as we went through the year, we got it down to 256 that got put into brackets. And then basically we rolled down to the Elite Eight. And then I did some big voting at the end. And we ended up with points and a champion. And now, I am a big fan of Casey Kasem. When I was growing up, I always listened to Casey Kasem count down America's Top 40. And actually, I was digging through my stuff the other day. You know, they used to send that stuff out on records. And so the radio station would basically be playing a record of records, which is kind of weird. Now, I had thought that it was actually Ryan Seacrest that had taken over for Casey Kasem, but I had forgotten that the original show was American Top 40 and that Shadow Stevens was the guy that took over. Anyway, enough of that nostalgia. The idea here being that today what I'm going to do is I am going to roll through. I have taken all of the scores from our 256 bracket and have compiled the highest scores for the champion, which is our number one, all the way back to number 40. And so what you'll be hearing today is basically the countdown of what everybody on Patreon and Instagram voted for as our independent craft distillery. So you're not going to see any Buffalo Trace, Four Roses, or Glenfiddich, or, this is going to be smaller distilleries that are not corporate owned, because this is kind of a mission of mine to get people starting to look more for craft distillery experiences. And the big guys have lots of marketing and budget, and they can afford to put together these grandiose marketing plans and play with the algorithms and the rest. But the smaller distilleries, not always so easy for them to do. So that's why I am focusing on them in this countdown. So another interesting thing coming up is that I am releasing a book called Experiencing American Whiskey. And this is a book that will basically help you travel across the United States, all broken up into regions. Basically, every state has a profile, and then there's a listing of all the distilleries in each of those states. Now, this comes out on January 13th on Amazon, and you're probably going to start seeing it in distilleries because a lot of distilleries are excited about the fact that this book is coming out because people can finally discover a distillery in Utah or a distillery in Alaska, or, there are distilleries everywhere. So that is what this book is going to be focused on. So this is kind of a celebration of the release of that book as well, which was inspired by me doing these votes on Instagram and Patreon. So enjoy. I'm going to be sharing some of the maps of where these distilleries are at as we're doing the top 40 countdown, and just enjoy it. It's a fun way to end the year and kind of get inspired for distillery travel coming up in 2026. Cheers. Number 40. Yes, I am going to do that for every one of these. Sorry. Just having fun, end of the year. Now, when it comes to making whiskey, there is no shortage of experience at Milam and Green, with Marlene Holmes spending 25 years distilling for Jim Beam, Heather Green, a whiskey author. She was Anthony Bourdain's go-to whiskey expert. Their distillery produces certified Texas whiskey using Texas-grown corn. But to add to their blending palette, they also source whiskey from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana. Blending, aging, and finishing is where the magic happens at Milam and Green. Learn more with a tasting, enjoy live music, and food trucks and tours are by appointment. Now, they come in on page 122 of Experiencing American Whiskey along with Iron Root Republic, Still Austin, and Treaty Oak. Talk about power-packed. Congratulations to Milam and Green for coming in at number 40 on our countdown of Whiskey Lore's fan favorite distilleries.
Number 39.
So our next distillery is actually the one that came in number 1 last year, Distillery of the Year, and is number 39 this year. And I had the pleasure of speaking with Roy Riashi, an 8th-generation Lebanese distiller and winemaker, in episode number 2 of Whiskey Flights. And I asked him what kind of spirits he wanted to start off with when he moved into the world of whiskey.
I started off primarily with malts, imported malts. I started off experimenting with malts from breweries. And then after I got the largest chunk of the trial and error down, then I started thinking of what styles of whiskey I wanted to produce. So the primary whiskey that I wanted to make was one that might reflect the Lebanese terroir. With the first whiskey, I decided that I wanted to use both local barley from the Bekaa Valley, and I wanted to use local wood, mainly Lebanese oak, Quercus libani. There were obviously some challenges. The first is that I had to experiment with floor malting, and then we sun-dry the malt. So basically, we borrowed from the ancient method of malting. And then after the fermentation, so the wash is fairly fruity, because the temperature that you're kilning at is fairly low. It's sun drying. We double distill it, and the aging part we borrowed from the Ara aging tradition. So Ara is usually rested in clay amphoras. So the main setback is that I cannot cut down local oak. And secondly, the last cooper in Lebanon died in the 80s, so we don't have local cooperages. So what we do is we get permit from the municipality. We just prune local oak, we debark them, we cure them, and then we place them in the amphora with the whiskey. So in a sense, it's even the aging method is quite Lebanese, and the flavor profile is very contextualized to Lebanon, because Lebanese oak is very distinctive in terms of flavor profile and taste, and even it imparts more color versus French oak or European oak or even American oak.
And if you want to learn more about Riashi, our number 39 distillery, all you have to do is go to whiskeylore.org/travel, then click on Asia, including the Middle East, Lebanon, and then you'll find Riashi's profile, and you can add them to your Whiskey Lore wish list. Free membership. It'll also be a great companion for experiencing American whiskey.
Number 38.
Well, a couple of years ago, I had a chance to have Patrick Miller, co-founder of Tal Nua Distillery, on the podcast. I was unaware of what pot still whiskey was at that time. Now, I know what a pot still is, and I know what whiskey is, but pot still whiskey, what does that mean? You see it on Irish bottles of Redbreast and the Spots. Well, Tal Nua in Colorado has been somewhat of a pioneer in that category here in the United States. It's one that is rising. And I wanted to share with you a little tidbit of my conversation with Patrick as he describes what the Irish pot still style is.
The difficulty of pot still whiskey and putting a single in front of it, all of those words are things that mean other things. And so when you say single pot still, people think, oh, one still. You see behind me, there's Kevin, our production manager, and our 3 stills. Now we make single pot still, because single means made at this distillery.
Okay.
Pot still whiskey means a mixture of malted and unmalted barley with up to 5% other grains, oats, wheat, rye. And that mixture, you have to have at least 30% malted barley, at least 30% unmalted barley. You can make up 100% any way that you want, or add up to 5% other grains. There is now a movement to make it a 30-30-30 mash bill, where you have 30% minimums of malted and unmalted barley, but up to 30% of oats, wheat, and rye that you would put into the mash bill because of some of the historic pot stills that really dominated the world and were really what the world was drinking and experiencing when they experienced Irish whiskey pre 1920s. And so that will be a big change in the landscape to really bring pot still whiskey into a new modern era, but really with a very strong historical backbone. Only 5% other grains at this point doesn't encompass some of the older, more established pot still whiskeys that have since gone away. The malted and unmalted barley is an undeniable quality. Here in Colorado, we are kind of America's barley state. We grow a lot of barley here, thanks predominantly to the Coors family, bringing Moravian strains of barley from Moravia in Czechoslovakia over to Colorado, hybriding those, crossbreeding those to be suited in Colorado soil, have made a very strong barley culture here in the state. And so we use 50-50 malted and unmalted barley. So we fit very nicely within that rule.
And so he had sent me 5 different samples of their range of whiskeys, which you can taste when you go to the distillery. And I got some distinct notes in it. And what's interesting about this is that those same distinct notes I got when I went over to Ireland for working on my book, Experiencing Irish Whiskey. So they are making the traditional pot still style. It does have a very distinct quality to it. And so people are starting to fall in love with that. We are finding now that there are more distilleries. As I did my research for Experiencing American Whiskey, there are quite a few distilleries that are starting to make the Irish pot still style. Well, congratulations to Talnua. They come in at number 38 on our fan favorite competition. They were a silver winner last year. They are a silver winner this year. And you will find them on page 215 of Experiencing American Whiskey, along with Storm King, Stranahan's, and Woods High Mountain Distillery.
Number 37.
Well, back when I made my first trip to Tennessee for doing distillery hunting, this was actually my second trip. I went to Jack Daniel's and George Dickel, thinking those were the only distilleries in Tennessee. But then I put together an itinerary of about 14 different distilleries that I went to visit to expand my knowledge of Tennessee whiskey and Tennessee distilleries. And the first one that I stopped off at was in the beautiful town of Jonesboro, historic town. And in an old salt house, pre-Civil War salt house, is the Tennessee Hills Distillery, which is where I ended up meeting the owner, Stephen Callahan. And they were small at that time. That was the only location. They now have 3 locations. They have the Jonesboro location. They make whiskey there. They have the Brewstillery, where they're making beer in Johnson City. And then they have this newest location, which is right off of I-81, where you can tour the distillery. They've got a column still, a hybrid pot still there. You can enjoy a tasting of a broad range of spirits. And you can check out their Smokestillery, which is an in-house restaurant. You can order a crafted cocktail or beer. You can get yourself a flight and step outside and actually see the Tennessee Hills from their porch seating. And fans are starting to catch on to them. They were a number 1 seed. They ended up winning silver in this year's competition at number 37. They're on page number 95 in the Tennessee section of Experiencing American Whiskey, along with Postmodern Spirits and Old Smoky and Short Mountain Distillery.
Number 36.
Now, one of the coolest distilleries you're going to see in Kentucky or even the entire United States comes in at number 36. It is Castle and Key Distillery. It is in the form of a castle, and that was on purpose. Colonel E.H. Taylor in the 19th century wanted to create a tourism showplace. Now, on Whiskey Flight number 5, I had an opportunity to talk to Brett Connors from Castle and Key, and I wanted to ask him, because he's been there from the beginning, what the decision-making process was like in terms of what old equipment, this 19th century and mid-20th century equipment that was part of National Distillers when they owned it, what they could keep and what they would have to get rid of, and how they would make that decision.
The assumption initially was that all your vessels and all of your production equipment was a loss. So we initially were planning on putting like a little 500-gallon pot, like a single barrel distillation system, into the boiler room. But when we started to look at a lot of the vessels from National, most of which were installed between the 30s and 50s. I think the surprise was the actual containers were in great shape. So things like your grain bins, we have 400,000 pound grain silos or grain bins. They look like they're brand new. I mean, other than cleaning them out, sanitizing them in new integration systems, I mean, they're probably $100,000 each to reinstall. So why would you get rid of them? They were also so large that the salvage company, there's no benefit to get rid of them. So from there, we go over to, we have the original meal bin room. We have one of the original 2 cookers. We had both of them, but one of them was an absolute nightmare to work on. So we finally upgraded to a brand new Vendome cooker. But, even our fermentations from the 50s, it's Core-10 steel. So a lot of the vessels we were able to keep not only saved us money, but allowed us to more aggressively expand our capacity in production. That being said, all the infrastructure is brand new water. We're working on a very expensive sewer line that we've gotten support from the government on. Everything, our transformers, our PLC automated systems, like all that is brand spanking new because it has to be. But I think for me, when we were evaluating equipment, the biggest questions were, does it pose a quality risk, a potential that it's going to affect our fermentation or distillation quality? Is it going to be a pain in the butt to run? We kept both of those cookers, and one of them was held together with prayers and a sledgehammer, basically. It was always finicky. But for the most part, I think it's we want to preserve history, but we also want to produce the highest quality product. So when those things were at ends, we always sided with quality.
So last year they came in at number 10. This year they are at number 36. But you definitely, if you're going to Kentucky and you love history, that is a distillery you need to go check out. It is on page 76 in the Appalachian section of the book under Kentucky, and all the details are in there. So you have no excuses. You don't actually, I have the Experience in Kentucky Bourbon book, and some of you may be thinking, well, maybe I should buy that book instead of buying Experience in American Whiskey. I have no problem with that. What I will tell you is that Experience in Kentucky Bourbon is dedicated to one state, so I'm able to do 2-page profiles for each of the major distilleries, whereas in this book, you're going to get about a 1/4-page description. So it's basically power-packed information to help you figure out what is special about each distillery. And there's a lot special about Castle and Key. Some of these are really hard for me to power pack in as much information as I possibly could. Number 36 of our Whiskey Lord fan favorite independent craft distilleries.
Number 35.
All right, now this is a weird one because it's a distillery that I've had on the podcast before. But when I had them on the podcast, I was interviewing them at a Michigan distillery. However, the distillery that ends up being in Experiencing American Whiskey is their Indiana distillery. And the reason that happened is because there are 24 distilleries that I have in the book for Indiana. And with 24, I wanted to do at least 6 profiles, but the best I could get were 3 because I just couldn't get in touch with anybody. So I decided that since Michigan I had a plethora of distilleries, and I was having a hard time figuring out if I was going to have to cut somebody out. So I said, why don't I just take Journeyman Distillery, and since they have a location in Valparaiso, Indiana, but they also have one in Three Oaks, Michigan, I'll just go ahead and put them under Indiana. So page 132 is where you're going to find our number 35 fan favorite distillery, Journeyman. And I have to say a big thank you to Johanna and Bill Welter. They actually came out to meet me on a Sunday night. I was doing my Great Lakes tour, and they were the first distillery I was going to stop at. And I left early in the morning and drove all the way up from South Carolina and got there, and they were nice enough to talk with me. So we got a little interview time in. So was this the building you started in, or did you start working out in a smaller facility and then come in here?
This is the building we started in, and there were older buildings in town, but they were torn down over time. And in fact, there seems to be a consistency in the I guess the Journeyman mantra, if you will. This building had been scheduled to be torn down. In fact, I have a copy of the article hanging at my desk. The building As you probably likely know, as many Americans do, there was a period of time where these old buildings, that people just tore them down. They didn't see a benefit. Perhaps they were an eyesore, or even an area where kids could get hurt in the building, so they were torn down. But with it went that amazing history and that storytelling. So I think one of the great things about our brand is we've done it a second time now in Valparaiso, Indiana, which I also have an article about that building stating that it was scheduled to be demolition.
Wow.
So we have two old historic buildings now that we've renovated, but I think the important story there is, as people have found, that when these old buildings are brought back to life, the stories come with it, but also the community generally has found it to be a tremendous benefit, in that oftentimes they become anchor tenants for commerce, but also that storytelling that is so important in life and in communities is revitalized.
Great whiskeys, nice restaurant there. Definitely worth checking out, either Valparaiso in Indiana or the one in Michigan. But the thing you need to keep in mind is if you decide to go to both in the same day, they're in different time zones. So Michigan is in Eastern time, whereas the Indiana distillery is in Central time. Great to have them in the countdown. They were a bronze winner last year. This year, silver, and up to number 35. And in fact, these are the best of the silvers. We have 8 silver contestants that have made it into the top 40. We'll be moving on to gold here very soon when we get to number 32. But again, page 132, Great Lakes section. The Great Lakes, basically the way I've divided this book up is into regions, and you'll see color tabs as you look at the book. So you get used to the fact that the Great Lakes are green, and all of these states that I have in the Great Lakes section all have some point of them that touches the Great Lakes. Now, Pennsylvania is not in there, New York is not in there, but all the other ones are in there. I decided to put them in the Northeast, but this is to help you be able to pick up the book, quickly open it, and go, oh, okay, I'm looking for a Great Lakes distillery. It's Ohio, or it's Indiana, or it's Minnesota, and you can just open it up and find the list of all the distilleries that have experiences in those states in experiencing American whiskey. All right, let's keep moving on with this countdown.
Number 34.
Well, speaking of the Great Lakes region, we have another Michigan distillery here. And what's interesting about Michigan, there are 36 distilleries in experiencing American whiskey. So when you go to Michigan, there are plenty of opportunities for you to go to a distillery and experience Michigan spirits. Well, you're also probably going to be experiencing Michigan grain in a lot of those cases. And Kent Rabish of Grand Traverse, our number 34 fan favorite distillery, had a little to say about that on our Whiskey Flight number 28. So you are sourcing your grain. How far away do you tend to go in terms of getting your grain in?
We pretty much buy from 2 farms. One of them's within 10 miles of the distillery, and the other one's probably about 25, 30 miles. So that's my wheat, rye, and corn. So, and we get great product. And I like having, I don't just want one supplier, because if something happens, farming is a crop, and you've got your wheat field and a big storm comes and knocks it all on the ground, you're done. Yeah, I got nothing. And the farm has nothing.
Yeah.
So we like having a couple suppliers. I used to have to get malted barley and malted rye. We got it from Breeze. Well, now 3 miles from here is Great Lakes Malting. They buy local rye and local barley. So I buy all my product from them now, to the point where the only grain I can't get, we have a whiskey that has peated malted barley, and that's coming from Scotland. So we are 99, probably 0.9% all Michigan grown agriculture.
How did you come about the idea of using, because you're using the peat in a rye, I believe.
Yeah, it is. We did an experiment, and we thought, if we like it, great. If we don't, and it's an oddball whiskey. You're probably going to love it, or you're probably going to hate it. But we're small. I mean, we don't have to be everybody's best friend on every product. So it's interesting. I like it. It's got the spiciness of the rye. You've got that. It's only 20% peated malted barley, so it's not like you're beating people over the head with that
Smoke.
flavor.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's something I'm going to drink neat and just leave it alone. I wouldn't do an old fashioned, or I wouldn't do those kind of cocktails with
Yeah.
it. It's more just a
Something
neater an ice cube.
something that needs a smoke note.
Yeah.
Like that. Now, what's interesting about Grand Traverse is that, there's 36 distilleries in Michigan. Some of these names you will have not heard of, and the reason, and Kent brought this up during our interview, distribution is a tough nut to crack, and sometimes so costly to try to get outside the state that you just say, all right, you know what, we're just going to focus in on the state that we're in. And a lot of Michigan distilleries do that. So if you want to experience those whiskeys, you actually need to go to Michigan to be able to check them out. Make sure to buy some bottles when you leave, because some of them will have them online, maybe at a seal box or somebody like that. But it's, again, kind of about the experience and about having something special. That is what I love about independent craft distilleries. People have been hunting for years for these rare bottles coming out of Buffalo Trace, but maybe the new trend is for people to be sharing their rare bottles that they've gotten from distilleries across the country. So congratulations to number 34, Grand Traverse, their first time here in the countdown, and a silver winner with Whiskey Lore's fan favorites.
Number 33.
Now, one of the distilleries I've been to that has a fascinating piece of equipment that now is starting to show up in other distilleries, but Todd Leopold was the man that brought it back. It is the 3-chamber still. And before Prohibition, this was a still that was popular and was used in Kentucky, Pennsylvania. Well, Todd also, through his research and discovery of this 3-chamber still, also discovered that there was a particular style of rye grain that was being used, and so he brought this heritage grain back and started having it grown in Colorado. So you learn all about this on the Saturday tours at Leopold Brothers, and you get to see the whole process, including a malting floor. This is a distillery that is one of the few in the United States that has a malting floor, and it's cool because you get to do a progressive tasting as you go through. And Saturday is it. I mean, if you're not there on a Saturday, you're not going to get a chance to go check this all out. You can actually do a pre-Prohibition flight. They're a little pricey, but that is something that you can do. Taste an old Maryland rye and also taste the rye whiskey out of the 3-chamber still. Or, of course, you're going to get plenty of other options there as well when you complete your tour. Leopold Brothers is coming in at number 33. This is their first year, and they are the top of the silver category. That's right. We are about to go into our gold medalist winners as we now rise to
Number 32.
Where's Wolfman Jack? Now, I have to admit that there are some distilleries in this countdown that I've had no interaction with from the podcast standpoint or from calling them and talking to them. And this one that is coming in at number 31 is a perfect example of a European distillery that I did not get a chance to interact with. The way I set things up, European means also we're going to include the UK in that as well. So you might be surprised to find out that our top European distillery is from Germany, which is St. Kilian, and they are a single malt whiskey maker, and they do tours there. I do not know enough about what they're doing there to be able to go too deeply into it, but it was really interesting to me to see that a German distillery actually beat out Scotch distilleries and Irish distilleries. The thing is that this year, because I've been so hyper-focused on the Great 48 tour for the podcast, and because I've been highly focused on American distilleries because of the Experiencing American Whiskey book I've been working on all year, Europe has kind of gotten pushed to the background a little bit. And so I can see, especially since we're also doing voting on Patreon, that I haven't had a lot of overseas people coming in and voting on Patreon. So that says a lot about St. Kilian's that they were able to actually sneak all the way up into the gold category. So one of those distilleries, one of these days, I'd love to go to Germany and actually find out more about this distillery. Number 32, first time in the countdown, St. Kilian.
Number 31.
One of the craziest trips I took this year was the western swing of the Great 48 Tour. Now, out of all 48 states, I got to 36 of them, 10 of them on this one trip, and it took 4,000 miles worth of driving, which a lot of people would go, "You're nuts. Why would you do that?" And then other people are like, "Wow, okay, that's really cool. And what distilleries did you get to go see?" Well, one of the ones that I went to see was one I had been to before, which is in Boulder, Colorado, Boulder Spirits, the Vapor Distillery, and Alistair Brogan, who I had met the first time I went there, and he walked me around the distillery, and we had a nice chat about things. This time I came through, and I said, what distillery would I love to do an interview with? And so I got together with Alistair, and we had a nice chat in episode 68, and one of those burning questions I have, Alistair comes from Scotland and he moved to Colorado and he starts making whiskey, and the Scots are going to have opinions about whiskey. And so I had one question on my mind I really wanted to get an answer to. We've got friends back in Scotland, I'm sure. Have they sampled it, and what kind of responses have you gotten, if they have?
So one of my proudest moments was we started getting distributed in Scotland, and I went over and went to the Inverurie Whisky Club, tasting events, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and I was pretty nervous because they didn't expect a Scottish accent, a guy coming over from America, and so it made for fantastic conversations. But I think when you're a whiskey lover, I think you want to experience everything, and I think you want to be able to try everything, and they don't really, the Scots have moved away from this, Scotland's got the best whiskey in the world, because whiskey, whether it be Tasmania or Japan, there's phenomenal whiskey. So the real whiskey guys want to taste new experiences. We're distributing in Kentucky as well, a very small way, and again I went down there and gave the whiskey guys that wanted to taste it, and again they were very accommodating. They wanted to taste new whiskies.
Yeah.
And if you listen to some of the social media guys now, they're realizing that there's some phenomenal whiskies that are outside Kentucky, and Kentucky guys know that as well. Yeah. It's not we're better, it's we're different.
You're different, yeah. So last year we had Alistair's Distillery at number 9. This year they are at number 31, a gold winner. Congratulations. They are on page 213 of Experiencing American Whiskey with a Profile, along with 291 Colorado Spirits, 10th Mountain Whiskey, and Bear Creek. And you can tell the Rocky Mountain section because it will be the orange tabbed distilleries. And you may be saying Colorado. Now you got a couple of Colorado distilleries in here. Where do they actually rank? Where does that state rank in terms of the number of distilleries in the book? Well, this was something I was curious about as well, because a lot of people across the industry will go, oh, well, this state has the most distillery. Oh, this state will give Kentucky a run for their money, and so on and so forth. Well, I actually have a listing now of how many distilleries there are in each state, and I may be missing a couple along the way, but this is fairly close to the number of distilleries that make whiskey and have some kind of on-site experience, whether it be tastings, cocktails, or tours. And here's how they rank from number 10 to, we'll go to number 3 and leave the surprises coming up after that. Number 10 is actually a tie. We have a tie at number 9, we'll say, which is Washington State and Wisconsin, both with 40 distilleries. Number 8 is Tennessee. Tennessee has 43 distilleries in this book in the Appalachian region. Number 7 is Pennsylvania with 44 distilleries. They are in the Northeast region. Number 6 is from the Great Lakes region, and it is Ohio with 45 distilleries in the book. Number 4 is Texas. Texas has 50 distilleries in the book. Number 4 is California. California has 56 distilleries in the book. And number 3 is Colorado with 63 distilleries. There are 2 states that have more distilleries than that. Do you know who they are? You're going to find out coming up.
Number 30.
All right, here's a distillery that is another one of those that I have had no interaction with. I really have not known much about this distillery other than seeing their bottles on the shelf and seeing them come across my Instagram feed every once in a while, and that is Few Spirits. Now, here's the thing about Few Spirits that I have recently discovered is that this is probably the last time that they're going to be on the Fan Favorites Craft Distillery list because they were acquired by Heaven Hill brand. So they are not really necessarily the independent craft distillery anymore. Although when I started this particular year, I did not designate independent. I just said craft distilleries, which is a term that is pretty wide open. And so I wanted to get a little bit more specific because what I want to do is the big guys, they got advertising budgets. They can go out and they can promote themselves, whereas the smaller independent distilleries, they don't have quite that same power. It's hard for them to get seen, and that is what this is all about. So congratulations, Few Spirits, on getting gold and reaching number 30. They do not have any tours, so they're actually not in Experiencing American Whiskey either at this point, but I do want to recognize them because they had great fan support this year that got them into the gold category. Congratulations, Few Spirits of Illinois.
Number 29.
One of the states I definitely need to spend a lot more time in is Texas. I have been to 3 distilleries in Texas, and all of them are Waco and North. I have not been down to Austin. I've not been down to San Antonio, and that area is just rich with amazing distilleries. And so number 29, we find one of those distilleries, and I just caught a good vibe off of this place by talking to their head of sales, Lindsay Pesic. She was just glowing about all the different things that are going on at that distillery and all the different things you can see. So I wrote my little profile up where basically I'm going to read this to you out of the book, because I don't know if I can encapsulate any more precisely than I could do by actually reading this, which is what these profiles are. They are really punching these into a very small bit of information. Founded in 2006 as Texas's 4th modern distillery, Treaty Oak was the first to focus on a Texas-grown, grain-to-glass philosophy. The distillery is situated on Ghost Hill Ranch, a 19th century cattle ranch. During Saturday tours, you'll learn about the property, see the original stills, visit the rick house, and taste the distillery's flagship wheated bourbon. The Treaty Oak does not chill filter, so don't be surprised if on a cold day you find some ghosts in your bottle. The distillery has food options, hosts events, and is dog and kid friendly. So this is what I've been trying to do with this book, is get as much information packed in so that you get kind of a feel of what the distillery is like. And obviously I hit on a lot of keywords in that particular profile, which means that when you're reading through these profiles, sometimes it'll feel like I'm stretching a little bit, but other times there's just so much. It's like, how do I say all of this in one little space? And Treaty Oak is one of those distilleries I definitely want to check out down the road. Page 122, along with them, another one of our fan favorites, Milam and Green, along with Iron Root Republic and Still Austin, all on that one single page. A lot of power-packed information in that one little piece of paper.
Number 28.
All right, so let's talk about a state that has a lot of opportunity for next year's edition of Experiencing American Whiskey. As I said, this is going to be an annual book. So my goal is, this year I wrote 227 profiles of distilleries out of 1,000 in the book. And next year I will take out probably half of those and replace them with new profiles from 100 plus distilleries, so that each year when you get the book, you're going to have some more distilleries to pique your interest. And since I couldn't get in touch with very many distilleries in Indiana, I have some distilleries I would love to talk to in Indiana and visit. And maybe when I do my Midwest tour coming up in 2026, I will get a chance to go to some of these distilleries, but some did make it in. And in fact, all 4 distilleries that I have listed in the book are in our countdown. And this particular distillery that comes in at number 28 is Old Homestead Distilling Company. Now, Old Homestead I have not been to, and I have not met the man who is doing the distilling there in person, but I have had him as a guest on the podcast quite a bit. And that is the alchemist Alan Bishop. Now, this is a very interesting distillery, and amazing that it's already getting gold, probably a lot off of the reputation of Alan Bishop, but also they are doing some really interesting things. Now, he has bred his own strain of corn that he is making some American whiskey off of. And it's unfortunately not something you're going to be able to taste at Old Homestead because they're distilling that off-site, and Indiana law doesn't allow them to give you samples from a distillery that is off-site. So this is one of the challenges of rules that are across the country and very different. And in fact, part of this book, at the end of each state, there is guidance on what some of those wacky rules are for each state, and why when you go to a particular distillery, they may say, you can't buy more than 2 bottles of whiskey, or we have to write your name down in the book so that we can track how many bottles of whiskey that you're buying and all that. I mean, there are some really fascinating rules that I researched for this book. But Old Homestead, they are in a place called Alcohol Acres. They have a distillery, a winery, a brewery, a restaurant, a hotel, and they are right on the edge of the Patoka Lake State Park. And it's really interesting because their focus is right now on making a spirit out of sunflower seeds. And they're making cordials and liqueurs. You can tour, but you need to get in contact with them to do a tour. They don't have anything really scheduled at this point. So it's going to be an interesting distillery to watch grow. This is their first year in the countdown, number 28, a gold winner, Old Homestead in Indiana.
Number 27.
Staying on page 132, we have another distillery from Indiana, and this one is the one that I like to call the Disneyland of whiskey distilleries. There is so much stuff to do at the Hard Truth Distillery, and our fans have recognized that last year. They got a bronze. This year they are up to gold at number 27. And I had a chance on Whiskey Flight number 36 to have a conversation with Brian Smith, the master distiller and also co-founder of the distillery. One of the things that sets them apart, and they put this clearly on their label, is that they use the sweet mash process. So I wanted to find out, first of all, how he discovered the sweet mash process and what it was about it that made that the process that he wanted to use in making his own whiskey.
My partners and myself had spent, the better part of a year really going, doing industry kind of connection tours in all the great distilleries in Kentucky. And Wilderness Trail kind of, this is around the size, would have been 2016. So I think that they had just started running their 18-inch column, but they didn't have any whiskey out in the market for sure. We were kind of in that area around Lexington. I'm like, let's go down there and check it out. So called them ahead of time, said, hey, we're starting a new distillery, want to just kind of see what you guys have going on. And to their credit, Shane and Pat blocked out 4 hours of their day and personally spent time with us that day. So as we're going through getting to know them, they started talking about this sweet mash process, and from a biochemical point of view, why it makes better whiskey. So as they're talking through and we're walking through the plant, it sounded at first as like a marketing shtick kind of thing. But then we went into that little rick house, and I think their oldest whiskey at the time had just turned 2 years old. And Shane drilled a barrel and let us try it. And it absolutely just broke my brain. I could not understand all the complexities that I was tasting in that whiskey at such a young age, but yet it was delightful. It wasn't no off flavors, right? And so then I went back and I started asking them more questions about what they had talked to me about before. And they explained to me that a lot of this has to do with the sweet mash process. So that really stopped me dead cold in my tracks, because what it turns me on from a palate standpoint is complexity and balance, right? So sometimes it's difficult to be complex and stay balanced, not be off in one direction or another. And to me, that rye whiskey was just so wonderful, and so differentiating, right? And so I knew, because the beautiful alchemy of making whiskey, I knew I wasn't going to repeat their flavor profile, but I understood from a scientific standpoint the explanation of why it was so different. And I was confident that, with the grains from our farmers and our water here in Brown County and our, patch of the earth that we are going to age our whiskey on, that whatever we created here, we could do so in a more, complex and interesting and delightful manner by using the sweet mash process.
So as you're looking through the book and you're trying to figure out what distilleries you want to go visit, I will be putting in keywords such as sweet mash. If the distillery is using sweet mash and they told me that they were making it with sweet mash, then I would go ahead and write that into the book. So these are the kind of little details that will help you figure out and learn more about whiskey. And it's also the reason why I tell people there are 1,000 distilleries in the United States, and you may think that distilling is the same everywhere, but it absolutely is not. There are these little differences and reasons why distillers choose one process over another. And that, my friend, tells you a lot about the people behind the whiskeys. And this is something that's lost in the bigger historic distilleries, in that you are so far away from the founders of the distillery that it has become kind of a company personality rather than an individual personality.
Number 26.
As I said, we have not had a lot of international flavor in this year's Fan Favorites competition. Maybe that will change a little bit coming up in this upcoming year, but of course the release of Experiencing American Whiskey is going to, again, put hyper focus on the American market. However, we did have a distillery breakthrough as our International Distillery of the Year out of Australia from the state of Tasmania, a place that I definitely want to go to. It's a place that is elevating its stature to a place alongside Scotland, Japan, Ireland, and the United States in terms of its whiskey making ability. And our distillery at number 26, last year was at number 13. It is Hellier's Road. And I had a chance in Whiskey Flight number 37 to speak with Derek Charge, the CEO of Hellier's Road, and head distiller Fiona Couts about the aging process in Tasmania, how it is different from Scotland, the United States, and so on, and kind of what the climate is like in Tasmania, just to get a sense of how whiskey might age there.
We're 40 degrees south here. That's not that far south if you're thinking Northern Hemisphere, but we're in the middle. So just to the west of us is the Southern Ocean. And if you go to our west coast and look westward, for an American audience, 14,000 miles to the nearest landfall, which is Patagonia. So you go right around 2/3 of the way around the globe. And so that really dramatically impacts the climate here. So Tasmania is a small island. It's about roughly the size of Scotland, slightly smaller than Scotland. Not a big island in itself, but there's quite diverse climatic zones within the state. And where we are, we have a really, really stable maritime climate. Our summers would be no more than 25 degrees centigrade in summer, and only a minimum of maybe 15 overnight. In winter, it doesn't get to freezing very often. We might get a frost a couple of times a year. But at the same time, we've got both a very humid and a very saline, salty, because of the impact of the ocean environment. So you've got this very gentle, but certainly warmer than Scotland maturation environment. So it never gets particularly hot and it never gets particularly cold. And in the diurnal variation during a day wouldn't be more than 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit.
However, I would add to that though that we very much do have 4 seasons here. So elsewhere in Australia, further north, it's, that tropical kind of climate. We're very much temperate and have 4 distinct seasons, which you might get all in one day, but you do get that seasonal variation, and we do get some crazy weather here that's really brings in that salt air. So most of our bond stores are actually situated very close to the ocean. So the distillery itself is up in the hinterland, but our bond stores are very close to the Bass Strait Ocean. So I could probably throw a rock from the bond store and hit the water. So you can imagine those humid sea fogs coming in, they do sort of lend a certain character to our spirit.
Sounds like you're just a little bit warmer than Scotland, but you're using used cooperage. You're using ex-bourbon barrels. You're using, as I understand, Oloroso barrels and such. Are you finding that you're having to age for different periods of time, that maybe 12 years isn't the kind of standard, or are you kind of falling in that line?
No, I would say that, say, a 7 or 8 year old for us would be very equivalent to a Scottish 12.
Okay.
In terms of quality and maturity at that age. So it is faster, our maturation, and not just extraction, but the actual, reactions that occur in the cask that give that lovely mature character. It is definitely quicker here, but not appreciably so when you compare to other areas around Australia and even in Tasmania. So down in the south of the state, they get very high variations in temperature, diurnal variation, and a lot drier and warmer in summer. So their maturation conditions, again, just within our small state, are quite different. So we are really an outlier up here in the northwest. We actually find that our alcohol by volume going into the cask, on cask entry, is quite often the same alcohol content coming out, which is highly unusual. So it would normally go up or down in the cask depending on the relative humidity. So that definitely is something that is unique to us here in the northwest. We still lose our 3% per annum in our angel share, but that alcohol content or the concentrations remains constant in cask.
Such a fascinating place, Tasmania, and one of these days I will figure out a way to get down there, but me and my long legs getting into a plane for 24 hours to fly does not sound appealing, so I'm going to probably be taking a hop around the Pacific to get there instead of going directly over the Pacific.
Number 25.
While burning some mesquite wood and drinking scotch, Elaine Paul asked her husband Stephen what it would be like to replace peat smoke with mesquite. And that question became the foundation of Whiskey Delbach. And using a malting device designed by Stephen, they produced mesquited and non-mesquited single malt whiskeys inspired by the flavors of the Sonoran Desert. Now you can find the Whiskey Delbach profile on page 211 in the Rocky Mountain section under Arizona. You will also find information about an Arizona bourbon trail in there. So lots of additional information that I'm adding into this book to help you as a traveler figure out things that you can do when you go to plan these distillery tours. Now, congratulations to Whiskey Delbach, silver last year, gold this year at number 25. And I have not been to Arizona for my Great 48 tour yet. It will be coming up, hopefully in 2026.
Number 24.
At number 24 is a distillery that I heard about when I first went to Kentucky back in 2018, but it was under a different name, Three Boys. And it was a little bit of a mystery as to what the distillery was really about. It was run by Russ Caldwell. He had founded it back in 2012. Walter Zausch took it over in 2021 and changed the name to Whiskey Thief, which is exactly what the experience is all about. And then they brought on Lisa Wicker this year in June. So I decided to have Walter on the podcast to talk a little bit about it. And I asked him what drew him to Whiskey Thief, how things ran back when Ross was running it and what he changed about it.
Well, I would keep the gates open on a Saturday. I mean, that was an easy fix. No, I mean, I took kind of what Ross was doing. And so if Ross, on those good days when you could get down, a lot of times people never really made it past the gift shop, depending on what was going on. But on those days where Ross was sort of entertaining people in the still house, or they weren't distilling or whatever it was, you know, you would come down and he would have a series of barrels, and he knew exactly which barrel tasted how, and where barrels go through upturns and downturns in terms of their flavor, which is something I learned from Ross that I never knew. And, you know, I thought, first I was like, this guy's kind of, I don't know, man. I'm not sure I buy this, because I've done all the tours and read all the books and done the stuff, and I've never seen this discussed, you know, and because they can change within sometimes 3 or 4 days, depending on what's going on with the barometric pressure, humidity, temperature, and all that. So he would have these barrels there, and he'd be like, no, you don't want to taste that one. It was good about a week ago, but it's not good now. And I'd go, that seems weird. You know, 27 barrels or something. He knew which ones that he wanted to showcase. So he would like kind of go through, thieve out of them, let you taste from them. And if you liked what you tasted, then he would fill you a bottle. And then he'd go, okay, I've seen enough people. And they would close the gates, and it didn't care. It didn't really matter if you were a tour company or 2 people driving in, you weren't getting in. So we reduced it down to, 5 barrels. We sort of design it. Originally, we did a lot more of designing it as a flight. So we kind of, knew what the flight experience was. Also figured out that, just like he told me, the barrels change. So even if you design the perfect flight in 2 or 3 days, it's changed. I also kind of figured out that it didn't really matter what you liked or what I liked or what Lisa likes. It's what the customer likes. And so, everybody tastes whiskey differently. Everybody has all these different preferences, high rye, high corn, or the mythology of the high corn is going to taste one way and high rye is going to taste another way. Even though, I might go, oh, barrel 3 is not my thing today. I got 3 people behind me going, this is our favorite one. Like, are you crazy? So I just sort of realized that it's a very subjective thing, and it's very democratic, and what you like is what you like. And so we kind of made it even more that way. And now, we're very careful. We never give tasting notes. We want every single barrel to have its own unique expression when you're there. And yeah, we'll tell you the mash bill, the age, the proof.
So you'll find Whiskey Thief on page number 78 of Experiencing American Whiskey, along with 66 other Kentucky distilleries. And it really has turned into a great experience. Drive down the dirt road, wind around, you're on the Three Boys farm. And it's not just thieving out of the barrel, but you also have a chance to tour, and you can sit out by the fire pit, play cornhole. Fridays and Saturdays, they have on-site food trucks. No doubt this one was going to come in on our countdown, and it comes in at number 24, Whiskey Thief.
Number 23.
Well, back in August of 2022, I had the opportunity to interview Kyle Marklin. He is the master distiller at Holiday Bourbon, our number 23 distillery, and I was impressed with him right off the bat. I sampled the whiskey. We had a nice long conversation in episode 75, and one of the things that impressed me was the fact that their whiskey was being released initially as 6-year bottled in bond. And another thing that impressed me was that on the side of the bottle, they were very transparent of where the barrels were coming from that were making up the small batch that made up this bottled in bond whiskey. So I asked Kyle how they do their batching and what constitutes a small batch.
We'll sample the barrels that we plan on using, and I'll bring them down to the lab, and we're going to try to make various composite batches using those barrels and kind of approximately the proportion they'll be used in. The batches have been 55 and 56 barrels. Probably a good number for us of where we're going to be for the most part. It may be more or maybe less depending on kind of what we're wanting to do. And, I say marketing and the board, everyone, it's this specific bourbon, Ben Holiday Bourbon. We want the flavor to drive it. And so honestly, if there's a time when we have 15 barrels that we're going to use, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to bottle it. And so we're going to let that dictate the bourbon more so than saying, okay, every one of them that we do is going to have to be 50 or 60 or whatever barrels. It's not driven by that as much as by the taste of it. And so, yeah, we'll go up, taste everything, bring them down, and then even another step, which we'll see if this happens over time, but once we've selected the barrels, then we're going to pull those barrels, we're going to weigh them. After we pulled them, we're going to sample every single barrel, and we want to make sure, we didn't get a sample that was good, and then we pull the barrel, and it's like, okay, well, wait, that one doesn't work. That's not the same as what we tried. And so we're being very, very cautious and careful with this, every step of this process. It's a lot of moving parts, but we want to make sure that we're not going to take one barrel that completely messes it up, and so that's kind of where we've been, and what we've done for the first couple, what we'll probably continue to do, and stay as well as we can of respecting each barrel as part of these batches.
One of the things I love about that distillery is that it has a long history going back into the 1850s, and we talk a bit about that on the podcast episode as well. One of those distilleries I definitely want to hit in 2026. Coming in at number 23 is Holiday Distillery, which is on page 160 of Experiencing American Whiskey.
Number 22.
So Lisa Wicker actually gets 2 spots in this year's countdown. She's not really with number 22 Widow Jane anymore, but I had the opportunity to talk with her in interview number 58 about Widow Jane, where the name of the distillery comes from, and it comes from the Widow Jane mine in Rosendale, New York, which is upstate in the Hudson River Valley, and that is where they bring in their proofing down water for their spirit, and it is a mineral water. Now, I am a big fan of mineral water, but I gotta say, it definitely has a distinctive flavor to it. If you get Perrier, if you get San Pellegrino, and it's a flavor that I like. Not everybody likes that flavor, but it's definitely a distinctive flavor. So when they are sourcing barrels from Kentucky, Indiana, wherever they get their barrels from, I wanted to find out from Lisa, do they actually have to kind of take into account this flavor and how it's going to mesh with the barrels of whiskey's flavor?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When I was first told that they were proofing with mineral, I'm like, okay. Okay. The first thing I did was test all the water. I tested the domestic water that was, they were mashing with. I tested the mine water. I tested all the water. And the thing that surprised me the most is that it came back with a recipe that's almost identical to that very famous French mineral water that's in a green bottle.
Okay.
And almost identical, right? The minerality on it is almost exactly the same. So it definitely, the thing that surprised me the most is it triggers some flavor notes that are very Widow Jane. And it doesn't matter whether it's distillate we've made ourselves or whether it's some of our sourced and blended whiskey. It definitely makes it, people are like, this is definitely Widow Jane, right? And, it's all terroir, right? Where the neighborhood is and all that. But I know mostly it's the water. And it, especially with our source stuff, it pops the cherry notes that are kind of in there anyway.
Yeah.
But it smooths out the baking spice. And after that, after I find those notes in one of our blends, then, anything else goes after that. But so it's certainly, and I tell people this all the time when I'm speaking, I'm like, take a cast strength whiskey. We don't have one, we'll never have one because we have to put our water in it, right? Or it doesn't turn into Widow Jane. But take somebody else's cast strength whiskey and let some of that famous French mineral water go flat.
Yeah.
And proof that whiskey down with some, not bottled water, because sometimes those bottled waters have been enhanced with minerals, right? Make sure you've got some distilled water.
Yeah.
Cut your whiskey with that, and then cut your whiskey with the flat French mineral water, and see what the difference is. You'll be surprised.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna have to play around with that a little bit. That is Widow Jane at number 22. They are on page 194 of the Experiencing American Whiskey book in the Northeast region in New York. And on that same page, Rock Valley Spirits and Taconic Distillery, and also a little description about what Empire Rye is all about.
Number 21.
Coming in at number 21 is a distillery that if you know it, you know it. If you live in the Southeast and you like cast strength bourbon and rye, You may have heard of Seth Detling and his Detling Bourbon and Detling Rye. This is a distillery that is non-tourable, so it's not in experiencing American whiskey. Wish it was. It's a little off the beaten path to get to. I had a chance to go meet with Seth, and one of the things I will say, first of all, he's a wealth of information. He is dealing with some weather and climate that is extreme, yet he manages really well in creating 4 to 8-year-old cask-strength whiskeys, and they're all filled with flavor, deserving of this number 21 spot. And we had such a great conversation while I was down there. I wish I recorded it. However, I will say that sometimes the conversations are a lot more free and fluid about all sorts of things. So I really got to know Seth, and I want to have him on the podcast at some point. It took me a long time to get down there. The first time I was going to go visit him was back in 2020. I had been watching him on Instagram, and I was heading down to the New Orleans Bourbon Festival, but then of course all that stuff got canceled because of something that happened in March of 2020, and so I finally got down there during my Deep South tour, and I'm glad I did. Detling coming in at number 21, and Alabama is on the rise. If you check out page 109 of Experiencing American Whiskey, you will see I have done 2 profiles in there. There are 5 distilleries in Alabama. They are working on a trail right now, and Conica Ridge is the newest distillery in there. I did a little write-up about them. They're in Troy, Alabama, not far from Opelika, where John Emerald is. So if you are driving up I-85 from New Orleans, this might be a nice little stop-off for you as you're making your way north. Opelika is also the home of the Bruzel Whiskey Festival. But Conica Ridge is the Clyde Mays Distillery, and so that is going to be something to be checking out in the future.
Number 20.
Well, last year they came in as a platinum winner at number 11. This year they are at number 20 with a gold. It is Nevada's Frey Ranch. And if you want to know anything about how farming impacts whiskey, check out interview number 14 with Ashley and Colby Frey, and then follow that up with Whiskey Flight number 71, where I actually went out to Nevada and we tasted through some of their single grain whiskeys and talked even deeper about farming and its impact on the flavor of whiskey. But for today, what I wanted to concentrate on was this concept of estate distillery designations. Maker's Mark is working towards that. Hill Rock Estate in New York is a pioneer in the space. And around Lake Tahoe, there are 2 estate distilleries, Minden Mill and Frey Ranch. So I wanted Colby to define what an estate distillery is.
In the wine world, an estate wine is considered a wine that is grown, bottled, and produced by the winery. So we just kind of carried that to the distillery, where we have 100% control over the entire process, from what we call ground to glass. And so it just means that we have complete control, which means we do often on the fields, like we'll sacrifice quantity for quality. And by growing it ourselves, we can do that. You know, we're just not buying commodity grains on the open market, which are fine. There's nothing really wrong with them. But there's so many things you can do to make better quality for distilling purposes, which by growing it ourselves, we can really tailor it to exactly what we want. And rarely is grain grown for a specific purpose. Traditionally, it's just sold to a co-op or for the open market, and it kind of goes wherever it goes, you know. And we grow it for whiskey, it has a final purpose, and we call it the whiskey farm here, and that's what we call myself a whiskey farmer.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear terms like grain to glass, farm to glass, seed to sip. They're all in Experiencing American Whiskey. I will say that I tried to use them as close to what I thought the definitions would be for them, but there is no pure definition for any of these. It's kind of like small batch. None of them have a defined framework of what needs to be included. Does grain to glass mean that they're actually working with farmers? Does farm to glass mean that they're a farm-based distillery? Are they doing on-site maltings? Because that's one of the steps that sometimes doesn't occur, because malting is a difficult chore. Now, Colby does that. He also gets 100% of his grains from the farm. So this estate distillery designation, to me, that is the gold standard where we know that the entire process is being handled in one place all the way to bottling. Frey Ranch is that way on page 244. Whiskey Acres in Illinois is another one. They're in the book. And Hill Rock Estate in New York is another one of those estate distilleries.
Number 19.
All right, we're going to do a little rapid fire here as I don't have interviews with the next 5 distilleries. However, I have been to 3 out of the 5 distilleries, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of experiencing American whiskey and the write-ups that you're going to find in the book, because I have profiled each of these distilleries. Now, on page 94 of the Appalachian section under Tennessee, you're going to find a page that has Nearest Green Distillery, Nelson's Greenbrier Distillery, Old Dominick Distillery, and a write-up on Old Glory, our number 19 distillery. Not far from the state line, Old Glory invites Kentucky visitors across the border to experience Tennessee whiskey. As part of the State Line Tour with M.B. Rowland and Casey Jones, Old Glory gives you the opportunity to complete a distillery trail in a single day and receive a nice gift for the effort. When you're planning your visit, make sure to reserve a table at their new restaurant. In fact, you might want to leave Old Glory to be the 3rd distillery that you visit. That restaurant is earning rave reviews. They also have a full cocktail bar inside the distillery, serving their charcoal-filtered vodka, Tennessee whiskey, bourbon, and a flavored shine. Check out their barrel-proof and single-barrel offerings in the gift shop. That's Old Glory. They are our number 19 distillery, first year in the survey.
Number 18.
Talk about a star-studded page. On page 132, under the Great Lakes section, Indiana, we have 4, count them, 4 distilleries that are all in the survey. Number 35, Journeyman. Number 28, Old Homestead. Number 27, Hard Truth. And at number 18 is Starlight Distillery. And for 7 generations, the Huber family has worked this land and in 2013 added a distillery to the winery and orchard. Close to Louisville, it introduces bourbon fans to a deeper story of farm, family, and the use of estate-grown grains. For an introduction, the Farm to Glass Tour shares stories, walks you through production to bottling, and offers a progressive tasting. Interactivity increases with the Straight from the Barrel Tour and the ultimate Bottle Your Own Tour. Find a wide variety of spirits in the gift shop, and the Tasting Loft is open 7 days a week for tastings or cocktails. That is Starlight Distillery, a great family distillery to go check out. Coming in at number 18 and moving up from silver to gold this year.
Number 17.
Now, when it comes to the Great Plains region of experiencing American whiskey, the distillery scene is a little bit thin. It's an area much more known for growing grain rather than distilling grain. However, Iowa and Missouri are shining stars in that region. And on page 155, you'll find Revelton Distilling Company, Lonely Oak Distillery, and our number 17 distillery, Cedar Ridge. 20 years ago, Jeff and Lori Quint took a chance and added a distillery to their recently purchased vineyard. Now, on our call, Jeff said that at the time, the idea of Iowa whiskey was much more crazy than craft. Now, bourbon was a natural first product. Then, after their son Murphy returned from working at Stranahan's in Colorado, they added single malt to their offerings. You can stop in for a grain to glass tour, sample their spirits, and take home a branded glass. Or extend your stay by relaxing on the patio within view of the grain silos and enjoy a slice of pizza and a cocktail or flight. That's Cedar Ridge, our number 17 distillery, first time in the survey, and they are our highest ranked gold winner.
Number 16.
Yes, we're in the Sweet 16, and this distillery is in great company, both in this survey's Sweet 16 and also on their page in Experiencing American Whiskey. On page 148 is Dancing Goat, 45th Parallel, Great Lakes Distillery, and our number 16 distillery, Driftless Glen. A family-owned distillery, Driftless Glen was founded in 2018 by Brian and Renee Bemis. Looking for an area with unique terroir, Baraboo sandy soils and sandstone aquifer provided the grain and water source that they were looking for. They produce vodka, gin, brandy, bourbon, and rye whiskeys. Tours start in the barrel house with a discussion of aging, followed by a walkthrough of the distilling process. Tastings, of which I got to enjoy myself, include ample time for a discussion of each spirit, and the Driftless Glen tasting glass is yours to keep. Their upscale bistro offers indoor and outdoor patio seating with views of the Baraboo River. That is Driftless Glen, kicking off our Sweet 16 and our first fan favorite Platinum winner.
Number 15.
All right, this is a fascinating distillery I had not heard of until they got voted into the fan favorites and started rising up to number 15. It's Marble Distilling, in the scenic vacation destination of Carbondale. Connie Baker and Carrie Shanks built one of America's great sustainable distilleries into a 5-room boutique hotel with cocktail bar. The distillery focuses on whiskey, producing a 4-grain bourbon, 3-grain rye, and triticale whiskey, all released as single casks. They also make vodka filtered through Yule Creek marble, the same quarry used for the Lincoln Memorial. Tours focus on their closed-loop water energy thermal system, the importance of limestone, and their Petite Eau proofing technique. That's Colorado's Marble Distilling, joining us in the survey for the first time at number 15, Platinum winner.
Number 14.
Well, one of the states that did really well this year in our fan favorite competition is Colorado. And on page 214 of Experiencing American Whiskey, we got some all-stars, including what you just heard, Marble Distilling, Leopold Brothers Distillery, Family Jones Spirit House, and our number 14 distillery, which is Law's Whiskey House. And I had an opportunity to talk to Al Laws, the founder of Law's Whiskey House, earlier this year on Whiskey Flight number 23. We talked a lot about the flavors of their whiskeys and how they get all of these subtle nuances and character into them. But we also talked about my visit to Law's and how back then you would do a tasting in the gift shop, and that now they have a brand new experience for people to enjoy.
It's a destination kind of place. So it's attached to the distillery. It's a very cool architecture, and it's meant to be an education center as well as, a cocktail bar where there's interaction with, folks who are making the drinks, who know how the whiskey's made and our lore, if you will, and our story, and here's why we do this and here's what it's doing to your cocktail. And so all those kind of things are fitting into this nice and tightly. And we've never done this before. This is our wading into hospitality, if you will. And we want you to have an experience when you come to do this. So if you get to tour, our tours are very experiential already. And I, wouldn't take a knee to any other place that does a tour. We do a great job of it. You're going to learn a lot, no matter how much you know about whiskey and how it's made. You're going to learn something. And we answer every question. People are like, oh, there's secrets. No, we don't believe in those certain things. Like, well, what's your temperature that it comes off at? Well, 68. Oh, you told us that? And to have those things be secrets, we don't really care. So we give people what they're looking for in those things and answer every question we can possibly answer, because we want to make the customer or the consumer more and more educated about it, because we win in that situation because they understand the complexities of what we're trying to build. And the tasting room is a new addition to that.
Will people be able to go in and just do tastings rather than taking the tour?
Yeah, instead of just going through, I think they have layers of stuff. So you can go in and just do quick tastings. You can go up and just do cocktails, or you can go through the full experience, which might take you an hour, but a little more detail and different layers for whatever people are into. We want to make sure that our consumer base is serviced how they want to be serviced. So
it'll be much different than doing a tasting in the gift shop, which is kind of the vibe that it had at that point.
It's kind of below our brand standard what we have now, but it's an intimate thing, and I know we're going to have people bemoan how I remember when it was just this little room with little oak tables, and it's loud because there's no soft we sat on these pews out in the, we have a whiskey church in the new tasting room, so it's a little more elegant. But, we'll have that. Like, that'll definitely happen. But we think this is the next step up. And, I hope people join us in that journey.
Last year they were gold. This year they've moved up to platinum. Number 14, Law's Whiskey House. They are one of 63 Colorado distilleries that are listed in Experiencing American Whiskey. Congratulations on platinum.
Number 13.
So coming in at number 13 is a distillery that I have had no interaction with, and they are not going to get a profile in the book because I haven't had an interaction with them and I don't know enough about them, and that is Wood Hat Spirits. And this is not for lack of trying. Wood Hat is in Missouri. They are right off of I-70. They're near Herman, which is a place I've been to before. The Missouri wine country is right there, so it's a great place to stop, easy to get to, but I have not been to the distillery, so no write-up on them. However, maybe this year, because my plan is to at some point get to Missouri, and they're going to be in a very convenient location for me to go and stop in. What I do know about them is that they have wood-fired stills, which I love that. I love finding distilleries that use wood and flame for doing their distillation. They also are using Hopi blue corn and Bloody Butcher corn, using sustainable practices. It sounds like an interesting story. You guys have voted for them up to number 13 this year, so I definitely want to find out more about Wood Hat Spirits. Now, while we're talking about how these distilleries are getting profiles in the book, in 2026, to get into the book, basically I had to either visit your distillery, have done an interview with you, or had a phone call with you, and then I would do a profile. We got 227 profiles that way. Next year, 2027, which the voting will happen in 2026, the way that you're going to get in the book is basically everybody who is in the book is nominated. There will be no nomination process. So from January to April, we are going to be trimming this list down to about 380 distilleries by doing 8 distillery votes a day, region by region, state by state. 128 distilleries will make it into the brackets automatically. There'll be a play-in round for the rest of them. Then, as we're going through the brackets, if you get past that first round and you get into the medal rounds, then you are eligible as a distillery to get a write-up in my 2027 book. So what I am telling you is, if you want to get your favorites a write-up in the book, then what you should do is head to patreon.com/whiskeylore and instagram.com/whiskeylore and get ready to vote and support your favorite distilleries, because everybody is in 1,009 distilleries, and this is going to be fun. You're going to get a lot of exposure across the country with this release of the book, as well as this ability for distilleries to get known and get promotion through Patreon and Instagram. So get out there, connect with us, and voting starts on January 2nd.
Number 12.
Well, here is the story of a distillery that made it into the platinum round, starting out with a single nomination, then surviving the play-in round, and then running the table to get up to the number 12 spot in our fan favorite countdown. New York Distilling and the Jaywalk Distillery. Now, I have had Alan Katz, co-founder, on the podcast before, and we had an interesting conversation. I was still learning about rye whiskey at that time. He's from Maryland originally, and so he has had a lot of experience with tasting rye when he was younger, and then he's into cocktail culture, so all of a sudden, rye is a great spirit to be working with in that case. And what he told me was that in those early days, it was really hard to find a supply of rye whiskey because not a lot of people were making it. So I wanted to dive in a little bit with him about rye and his interest in it and how he was sourcing his rye.
It was evident to me as I was probably twiddling my thumbs and doodling for several years about concepting a distillery that I wanted to make rye whiskey. And I love bourbon, and I love a range of styles of international whiskeys, but that if I was able to open a distillery, that I wanted to focus on rye specifically. And part of that story, I thought, had to be about the agricultural link to New York State. And I had had a really wonderful experience for about a decade as a nonprofit volunteer, essentially helming the board of directors of an organization called Slow Food. And it was through that experience that I was able to develop wonderful relationships and most impactfully for me, learning experiences about agriculture. I was able to interact with a few key people, particularly in upstate New York and the Hudson Valley and the Finger Lakes, and opportunistically take advantage of relationships that would hone me in on what we might be able to do in an interesting fashion from growing grains, the types of grains, the varieties of rye that we wanted to focus on, and what we thought we might want to derive from these grains ultimately to a finished whiskey. Again, I reference, we're not trying to be esoteric. We don't want to put something in someone's hands and say, well, can you figure out what to do with it? We want it to be accessible, but we also want to be unique. The worst thing I think you can ask, whether it's a distiller or a brand owner, is, and I get to ask this all the time, is, so what does your product taste like? As if to infer, does it taste like something I'm already familiar with?
Right.
And it doesn't typically come out of my mouth in audible range, but in my mind I'm thinking, well, why the hell would I make anything that tastes like someone else's product?
Right.
That's not why we got into this. We're trying to add to the conversation. And that really is not only the starting point, but the through line of our work with our farming family. It's the Peterson family farm in the Finger Lakes region near Seneca Falls, New York. And if you're not familiar, that's about a 6-hour drive north of New York City.
Okay.
So closer to the Canadian border than it is to New York City, of course.
Now, New York is a state that a lot of people don't realize how much whiskey is going on there right now. They are actually the number 2 state in this book for number of distilleries with 65, and New York Distilling is the highest ranked one. Now, New York Distilling actually worked with Kings County, Finger Lakes, Coppersea, Tuttletown, and Black Button to come up with the Empire Rye designation. If you want to learn about that, it's on page 194 of Experiencing American Whiskey. And on the same page, 193, with New York Distilling, is Iron Smoke, Hill Rock Estate, and Kings County. A lot of great whiskey to discover in New York. And congratulations to number 12, our highest ranking New York distillery, New York Distilling.
Number 11.
Well, we are on the edge of the top 10, and a great distillery for storytelling is Kentucky Peerless. They were gold last year. They are platinum this year. They are knocking on the door of the top 10, and well-deserved. Corky and Carson Taylor, very personable. When you go to that distillery, you may actually see Corky on your tour. And in fact, he was on my first tour through there, and we got into a little bit of a conversation about a photo that was up on the wall, and he started to tell me a story around that photo. And so I wanted to have him relay this story to you, kind of the way that he told me. And it all starts with his great-grandfather. And what I'm going to tell you is, when you listen to this story, remember what goes around comes around.
Well, Henry Craver was my great-grandfather. He was born in Poland. He moved to New York City to Manhattan with his family when he was 5 years old, selling newspapers on the corner. And when he was 19 years old, he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave my family in New York. I'm going to get on a riverboat, and when I run out of money, that's where I'm going to end up. My question is why he didn't get off the boat in Louisville, Kentucky. So he went on down to Henderson, probably another 6-7 days by riverboat. Got off, didn't have a nickel in his pocket, didn't know a soul. Walked to the top of the hill. There was one bar up there called Puckett's. He walked in. He said, can I sweep the floor and live in the attic? I have no money. And they said, sure, come on in. And a couple of years later, he bought the bar. But he knew he wanted to become a banker. That's what his Some of his friends in New York, in Manhattan, their fathers were bankers, and he had it in his mind, that's what I want to do. There was another family in Henderson, the Mann family, and they said, well, you just can't become a banker. You've got to be trained, you have to be educated. We bank in St. Louis. We'll get you in the bank over there. You probably have to stay 4 or 5 years, which he did. He stayed 5 years, and then he ended up coming back to Henderson and built First National Bank. But in 1889, he first bought the Worsham Distillery. He banked with them. It was a very, very small distillery. So he went out on 2nd Street, bought 19 acres, and built Kentucky Peerless Distilling Company. He loved the name Peerless. It means pure and clean, the best of the best. And he knew exactly what he wanted, and he built that into a pretty good sized distillery. He had the distillery from 1889. He shut it down in 1917. So what he did was, Prohibition didn't come along until 1919, so they thought he was pretty smart at what he was trying to accomplish. He sold all his stills in 1917 to United Distillery in Vancouver, British Columbia. And he hired what he thought was the best welder of copper in this whole part of the country. It just happened to be Mr. Sherman here in Louisville. Well, my great-grandfather got a hold of Mr. Sherman in 1917. Said, what I want you to do is I want you to bring your family to Louisville. I want you to break these stills down. It's probably going to take you 8 months. I've got a house for you to live in, place for the kids to go to school. I want you to take it up to Vancouver, British Columbia on 17 train cars. You have to set them up there another 7 or 8 months, come back to Louisville, Kentucky. And that's where he got part of the money to start Vendome Copper and Brass.
Wow.
98 years later, my son Carson and I walked through the door of Vendome. And they said, where are you from? I said, well, I'm originally from Henderson, Kentucky. Well, what family? I said, the Henry Craver family. And then they left the room, they came back and said, you're not going to believe it. It was your great-grandfather that helped one of the ones that helped put our great-grandfather in business. So it's a small world.
Yes, it's the circle of life, as they say.
It is. And 98 years later, so you never know what's going to happen 98 years from now.
It is a great story and definitely a distillery you need to visit. Number 11, Kentucky Peerless Platinum. And they're on page number 77 under the Appalachian region, Kentucky, along with Neely Family, New Riff, and Maker's Mark. And I will tell you that one of those distilleries is still to come in our countdown.
Number 10.
All right, get ready for rapid fire, because out of the next 6 distilleries, 5 of them I have only had phone calls with, no interviews. I've not been to the distilleries, and one of them I've had no contact with whatsoever. So we're going to go into number 10 with an Ohio distillery, and I'm telling you, Ohio, 45 distilleries in the book. And on page 144, I got Watershed Distillery, Seven Brothers Distilling, and our number 10 distillery, Middle West. And inspired by family distilling roots that reach back to the old country, Middle West founder Ryan Lang planted the seeds of a new legacy in 2008. Recognizing the benefits of Ohio's 4 microclimates, he worked with farmers across the state to gain control of his grain sources from seed to glass. Middle West has a diverse lineup of bourbons, ryes, finished whiskeys, vodka, gin, and bourbon cream. They also provide high-quality whiskey to outside distilleries. You can book a tour with an optional tasting flight, including their dark pumpernickel rye, or reserve a table at the Service Bar restaurant. That is Middle West number 10, and I will be talking with them more in the future because Ryan is actually digging into Ohio's distilling legacy, and it is a fascinating history I'm definitely interested in learning about.
Number 9.
Now, in our second year, there seems to be like a yearly favorite state that all of a sudden pops up out of nowhere, and the Missouri Spirits Expedition Trail is probably part of the reason why there is some camaraderie in Missouri, and Missouri got a lot of votes this year, and I was really starting to think that they were going to be popping up towards the very top. And in fact, our number 1 platinum distillery is the one that comes in at number 9, which is the West Bottoms Whiskey Company. Now, West Bottoms invites you to step back into an era just before Prohibition near a neighborhood once known as the wettest block in America. Built into a historic train tunnel and former farm equipment manufacturing plant, West Bottoms is known for some of the best whiskey cocktails in Kansas City. On the production side, the distillery embraces the tradition of rectification, an art form that was meant to improve a whiskey before a few bad actors tarnished its reputation. See how West Bottoms blends and distills on a tour, enjoy a cocktail, and pick up a distillery-exclusive peated American single malt at West Bottoms Whiskey Company in Kansas City. And congratulations for them being at number 9. They are not the highest-ranked Missouri distillery, though.
Number 8.
Welcome to our double platinum distilleries. Everybody from here on out is double platinum. And number 8 is a distillery that I know nothing about, other than they have really passionate fans who push them all the way up to number 8. Switchgrass Spirits out of Missouri. Had to do a little bit of digging. Apparently they are in a rebuilt historic American Legion Hall north of St. Louis. They're an equitable distillery, meaning the workers are the owners. They use sweet mash as their process. They are grain forward, and they use Missouri white oak. A lot of the distilleries in Missouri use Missouri white oak, and why not? You have the Ozarks there, take advantage of it. They make bourbons, rye, brandy, finished whiskeys, and bottled cocktails, and they have Saturday tours by appointment. Hopefully, in 2026, I will learn more about them.
Number 7.
So, what is there to do in central Georgia? Well, if you're a Jimmy Carter fan, you can explore his legacy in Plains, or Civil War buffs can explore the POW camp at Andersonville. The one thing you shouldn't do is sleep on the whiskey scene. Family-owned and operated 13th Colony has spent the last 16 years serving up bourbon, rye, and hospitality. You can end your week with a tour and tasting, learn how these families support the community through their charitable endeavors, and remember the visit by taking home one of those distinctive pot-still-shaped whiskey bottles. Coming in at number 7, first time in our survey, and just doing a bang-up job. And one of the reasons, actually, after talking with them, that I felt even more passionate about the fact that people need to get outside of their comfort zone and go visit distilleries in places you wouldn't expect them, or even go off the beaten path a little bit, is because of how nice they are at 13th Colony. And they are coming in at number 7. Congratulations to them. Georgia is shining bright with ASW 1861, Distillery of Modern Art, and 13th Colony, all on page 71. Check it out in Experiencing American Whiskey. And don't forget, voting starts on January 2nd for this year's fan favorites. And so get on patreon.com/whiskeylore and instagram.com/whiskeylore, because Georgia is first up and 13th Colony's hopes are in your hands.
Number 6.
Well, in a town known for tobacco, Broad Branch Distillery is definitely making waves. And back in 2014, John Fergakis and Nick Dumas set up a whiskey distillery with a 750-gallon custom pot still placed in a 100-year-old tobacco auction house. They focused on sourcing quality local ingredients and letting barrel age work its magic. The founders have since passed on, but John's daughters, Anna and Natalie, have picked up the mantle, with longtime head distiller Don Jenkins delivering their flagship 6-year rye and 7-year single-barrel bourbon. Tours are available on the first Saturday of the month, and single-barrel releases are available in the gift shop. There's a lot of whiskey to be investigated in North Carolina, and this is the distillery that comes in as the top-ranking one out of 30 distilleries. Definitely worth checking out, Broad Branch.
Number 5.
Check out who we have on this one single page in the book. Page 122, Iron Root Republic, Milam and Green, Treaty Oak, and our number 5 distillery, the highest ranked in Texas, Still Austin. And I have to ask, have you seen one of those unmistakable Still Austin labels at your local whiskey shop? Well, that was designed by artist Mark Brookhart, and that artwork provides an insight into the artistic vibe of the distillery and the town it calls home. Local partnerships are a key ingredient, with 100% of the distillery's corn, rye, and barley coming from Texas farmers. If you take a tour, you get to meet Nancy, the 42-foot Scottish-built column still, learn how they toast and char their barrels, dive into the distillery's history, and see what it takes to be an eco-friendly distillery. And afterwards, you can step out on the patio to enjoy a cocktail or live music. Still Austin's one of those distilleries I definitely want to have on the podcast someday. I am so fascinated by them. And actually, I have had one of their founders, Andrew Bromberg, on the podcast talking about his Texas whiskey history book. If you have not heard that, I definitely recommend going back and listening to that, because there's a whole lot of Texas history and whiskey that just does not get any attention. So congratulations to Still Austin, double platinum up from silver last year in an area that is just swarming with great distilleries to visit.
Number 4.
Now we're all the way to number 4, and you would think that I know all of these distilleries intimately by this point, as they have done so well throughout the year, but I have had connections with the brothers at Blom Brothers, Matt and Mike, but I have not really had any conversations with them up to this point. So hopefully one of these days that will happen. The most I can tell you about the distillery is that it's in Galena, Illinois, which is a town that I went to many years ago to go to General and President Ulysses S. Grant's home. And apparently now the distillery has usurped that as the number one visitors attraction in the area. So more reason for me to go. They also are in an old Mormon church. They're doing grain to bottle and using non-GMO Illinois grain. So this is what I know about Blom Brothers. Need to have them on the podcast. Maybe I will fit them in on my Great 48 tour as I try to complete that this year. But congratulations, double platinum winners, Blom Brothers, for coming in at number 4 on Whiskey Lord's Fan Favorites 2025.
Number 3.
One of my favorite distillery visits of the year was when I got a chance to go to Pennsylvania for a Pennsylvania documentary, and we decided to use Stolen Wolf as our location for filming, and I got a chance to meet Eric, Aviana, and Jim Wolf in person, and also Laura Fields, and had a great time while there. And I didn't get a chance to tour the distillery. It's my only regret. Otherwise, had a great time. And late last year when I started the Whiskey Flights podcast, I actually had Eric on the show. And if you want to understand who Stolen Wolf is, I think you got to go back and understand who Dick Stoll is. So I wanted Eric to tell the story of that relationship.
Thinking about how we could get back to the type of childhood I had and raising our daughter here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And my wife very astutely pointed out there was nothing I could do outside of marketing and working in restaurants. So what was I going to do to move home? And as we're having this discussion driving back to New York where we were living, we were quite literally passing Distillery Road where Michter's used to be. And at that time we were really involved in local food and regional food traditions, and started discussing the fact that that was such an amazing local tradition and history, and the fact that very few people, including us, knew very much about it. So it was sort of the classic case of not knowing what we didn't know, and then beginning just to sort of pull at a thread, and sort of our whole universe unraveling and leading us to that point. We were ultimately introduced to Dick Stoll, the last master distiller at what was the Michter's Distillery in Chaferstown. We were introduced to Dick and his wife Elaine by a local historian, Ethan Smith. And when Dick and I had the chance to meet for the first time, he later admitted, he was like, well, they told us someone was interested in starting a local distillery and we had to meet them. What we didn't expect was you to show up with historic bottles that you liked for inspiration, samples of some things that you were working on at home. And thankfully he wasn't overwhelmed by all of our enthusiasm and was crazy enough to come along on the ride. But for us, just getting to meet Dick Stoll and speaking with him, and with Dick, it was amazing. He was just so incredibly humble And I think for him, one of the biggest things that he had trouble sort of truly understanding was that anyone wanted to meet the person who had made their whiskey. For him, it was a production facility, and he took that very seriously, whether they would have been making food products or, widgets. Dick was incredibly committed, and there was a way to do things, and that was the right way. That said, for him, so much of that process was so artistic and artisanal, but in general, the main sort of overarching process that Dick was working with was a sweet mash rye while he was there, which very Pennsylvanian, and then also, to my mind, very Eastern Pennsylvanian, was a 60% rye, 30% corn, 10% malt. I'm sorry, excuse me. That was the percentages were 5% the other way. Excuse me. So it was 55, 35, 10. Excuse me. So when Dick came to Stolen Wolf and had the opportunity to sort of create his own mash bill, he went closer to what they used to make for a Sam Thompson rye. So ours is 60, 30, 10. A little bit more expensive with that extra rye. But that's definitely one thing about Eastern PA rye with the sweet mash process. Certainly not the cheapest way to make rye, certainly not the most efficient way to make rye, but just historically a very flavorful process and something that's very, very historic to our area.
Well, I was very happy to see Stolen Wolf do so well this year, up from bronze to number 3, double platinum, and congratulations to them. If you're looking for their profile in Experiencing American Whiskey, they'll be on page 200, along with Pond Fay, McLaughlin, and Thistle and Finch. And Thistle and Finch is actually right down the road from them, so that would be a nice distillery to pair along with them. Boy, we are ready for the top 2. Are you ready for the top 2?
Number 2.
Well, here's a distillery that is no stranger to the top 3. Last year, they were fighting for that championship, came in number 3. This year, they are up to number 2. It is Kentucky's Neely Family Distillery. If you have not been to that distillery, it is a fascinating one. Lots of stuff going on there. And they have a lot of equipment that you don't see elsewhere, such as they have a worm tub, which is something that comes from the old country. And they're doing triple distillation. They have open top wooden and stainless steel fermenters. There's just all sorts of stuff to check out. And now they're bringing on a 3-chamber still on top of that. Now, if you go to the distillery, the first thing that I will tell you is that the video that they show you of the history, Royce tells the story. He tells it in my podcast too. It's a little violent, I will say. It's the old moonshining stories. But the other thing, during our conversation, I really wanted to dive into what they're doing with wild yeast. Now, yeast is something that Kentuckians do talk about probably a bit more than they do over in Scotland and other places. So it kind of goes back to the moonshining culture.
Yeah, the mountains themselves are set up perfect for making whiskey. The reason why natural springs are there, so the water's good and clean for one, but number 2 is those natural springs very cold. Mm-hmm. And you can set your still up below 1 and gravity feed the water from the spring down to the worm and into the pot. And it took a lot of the labor off of it.
Okay.
So the mountains, not only because of the fact that they're so isolated, but the water itself and the environment, the terroir, is perfect for making whiskey. And they have natural yeast strands that are present there. We still use one that our family, a lot of people don't understand this. They didn't just go buy Fleischmann's or baker's yeast or stuff like that back then. Yeast wasn't even discovered till I think 1870 by Louis Pasteur. Before that, all whiskey was being made with wild yeast that you caught and either propagated in a Donna jug, or most of the time they just knew that there was seasons where you made whiskey at when it was warmer out, and you take your mash and let it sit outside, and the wild yeast, the natural yeast, gets inside of it and works it.
Okay, and you're bringing a lot of those techniques into here. I mean that.
Yeah, I'm still probably one of the only distilleries in the United States, in Kentucky, that still propagates and grows a yeast strand on site. And it's the same one. We go catch it once a year down in the mountains out of Neely Fork, bring it up here. I keep it in a copper Donna jug year round, and we work off of that. We use it to make our moonshines with, and now we're starting to make a bourbon with it as well, which is kind of neat. I'll let you try it when we get down here.
Nice.
I got the white dog back there. First time we ever run it, but we've actually got this room over here to your left is actually going to be a Donna room. And Dick Stoll, who was the last master distiller for the Real Mictors that closed in 1991 in Pennsylvania, a good friend and mentor of mine, actually designed this yeast room for me.
Oh, okay.
So he was taught how to grow yeast from Charles Everett Beam, and who was the distiller at the time. It was called Baumberger's. It became Mictors. He was the distiller there until he died of a heart attack. And he was from the Beam family.
Okay.
And he's the one that taught Dick Stoll, and Dick Stoll taught me, so that's kind of a pretty cool thing.
Oh, very nice.
Yep. So I'm able to, to not have to rely on anybody else to make yeast for me, which to me is, if you ever want to be a real distiller, you need to be able to work and grow your own yeast.
Yeah. So it was funny when I was going through these old audio files, and then I came across that and saw that there was a tie between number 2 and number 3 in our countdown. Pretty awesome. So Neely Family Distillery, definitely worth checking out when you're headed to Kentucky.
Whiskey Lore's fan favorite of the year, number 1.
Once we got into the medal rounds, this distillery engaged their fans big time. In fact, according to David Meyer, they pretty much loosened up their newsletter and said, hey, go on Patreon, vote for us. That is how you win this competition. That's exactly what they ended up doing, and they are our champion this year. It is Glens Creek Distillery. Congratulations. Man, you guys are going to be hard to beat next year, and I am telling you, anybody that wants to win this competition is going to have to basically get on to Patreon, get their fans out there, and get them voting big time. It can happen, and we will see, because they're going to be in a tough bracket coming up in the next year, but well-deserved win for Glens Creek. And if you want a sense of what this distillery is about, they don't do tours necessarily, but instead you sit down with the distillers and you do a tasting and you have a conversation. And if you get David, the owner, on the conversation, he is going to unload his mind for you and tell you his opinions about things, and he just lets it go, and it's so fun. And no wonder these guys are coming in as Whiskey Lore's fan favorite distillery of the year. And of course, I have to share a little snippet of my conversation with David that we had in one of the little side rooms off in their distillery, which is part of the bottling hall of the Old Crow Distillery. So when you started in here, there was no thought of doing a column still. You wanted to go straight in, and you built everything.
I didn't have the money. I mean, quite frankly, those are expensive. And then you have to have all the infrastructure around it. And I tell people, I said, look, there's 2 ways that I know of to get into distilling. One is expensive, and the other is really damn expensive. All right?
Yeah.
And you got to say, well, if I'm going to put this bourbon away for so many years in a barrel, that I said we had cash flow. It was just going the wrong direction for a long time, and it's tough, really tough. So the thought process, and we build distills out of used equipment. The thought process is try to reduce costs as much as possible. And I look and I see equipment for sale now, and I see these things, and I look at it and I go, wait, they have a 125 gallon still, and it's $80,000, or a 300 gallon still, and it's $150,000, and I'm like, we don't have $80,000 in all 4 of our stills. And I've got one that's 300 gallons, I got one that's 150, one that's 125, and one that's 500 gallons.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, a 125 gallon pot still, if you put 8% mash in that thing, you're going to get out 12 gallons of finished product, 15 gallons. How can you operate? How can you cover those expenses with that little bit of alcohol?
Yeah.
And so I just shake my head sometimes, and I think everybody wants to get into this business because it seems romantic, and wouldn't it be great? And oh my gosh, what a great job! You get to taste alcohol every day. And I don't know if they don't understand. I mean, I bought this dilapidated place, and I did my own portion of silliness, but I also realized if we're going to succeed, we can't spend that kind of money on equipment.
Yeah.
And that's just the still. That doesn't include the steam boilers, and that doesn't include the cookers and the fermenters and all the other things you got to have to make it work.
Right.
And we don't have $80,000 in a whole lot of it.
How do you come from your background and suddenly end up building a pot still? Where do you have to go? You go to a YouTube video and figure out how to do it.
If I were telling the truth, I'd say, well, allegedly, I might have built a still before I had a permit. Because
that's the history of whiskey, isn't it?
Well, a friend of mine, I worked with a guy, and he came to work one day, and he's all excited. He says, I want you to build a still. I want to make sugar shine. I said, what makes you think I know the first thing about a still? I didn't know a thing.
Yeah.
He says, well, you can weld, right? I said, yeah, but I don't really see the connection, welding and still building. But he had some information, and like say you go to YouTube and you go, oh, okay, a pot still. It's a tank that you apply heat to. And what do you have to have? You have to have a way to fill it, you have to have a way to drain it, and you have to have somewhere the vapor to come out. So he had a beer keg, an old decommissioned, beat up beer keg. Well, the beer keg has a top on it that'll just coincidentally hold a 2-inch tri-clamp fitting that you can mount a 2-inch copper column to have your vapor come out. And so you cut some holes in it and you weld some fittings in there to have a way to fill it and a way to drain it, and off you go. And so then I gave it to him, and he never used it. And I didn't think much of it again. And a couple of years went by. I was at his house. I said, what are you going to do with that still? He said, oh, I don't know. So anyway, he gave it to me, and I thought, what am I going to do with the darn thing? I made it, but I don't exactly know how to use it. So then I bought a column, because I thought, well, that's the complicated part. Doing it myself, then when somebody pointed out the distillery for sale, then the business idea came in. I never really expected it to be a business. I enjoy making stuff, and so doing it, and people think if you don't sell it, it's legal, and no, it's not legal at all. You can't distill a single drop in the United States without a permit.
Yeah.
But I can talk about it now because they have to catch you
while you're doing it. Yeah.
That people always ask about the moonshine show. So, well, I don't know if they're actually distilling moonshine on the show. They could be running water through the still.
Yeah.
But the ways the laws are set up, they have to catch you with it. You can't just see you on a YouTube video and then come and arrest you, right?
I laugh at that because I keep thinking there's a crew that's driving out with these guys to video them.
You think?
They probably have their phones turned on with GPS.
You think?
Yeah.
Or wait a minute, you were on there last season, and I'm the sheriff, and I know you, and I know where you live. Maybe I'll follow you one day.
Exactly.
It's TV. Okay, it's entertainment. But yeah, that's how I learn, and I like making things. I like experimenting, trying things. So I probably rebuilt that thing about 20 times.
The one and only David Meyer. Great way to end the countdown at number 1, Glens Creek Distilling. Well, thank you to everybody who voted this year. You guys helped promote some great craft distilleries, and I know that they appreciate it because I heard it from them while I was gathering information for Experiencing American Whiskey. That book, Whiskey Lore's Travel Guide to Experiencing American Whiskey, will officially be hitting Amazon on January 13th, so watch for that. Make sure to get out there and support all these great distilleries. And don't forget, voting starts on Friday, 8 distilleries a day on Instagram stories and on Patreon also. And we're going to be going region by region, state by state. Everybody in the book is already nominated. Those are the ones we're going to be voting for. Let's get ready to vote in next year's champion and shine a light on everyone else along the way. Just go to patreon.com/whiskeylore or instagram.com/whiskeylore, both of them, for a better chance to win. Every vote counts on Patreon. Thanks again for another great year, everybody. Hope you and yours have a safe and happy new year. Whiskey Lore's Whiskey Flights will return next week with a trip to New Hampshire. Until then, cheers and slanjava. Whiskey Lore is a production of Travel Fuels Life, LLC.